Welcome to the Eureka Moment.
Jay, thank you for joining me. So today I'm sitting down with Jay Kim. We started out with sort of this business relationship, and it's turned into a great friendship. And I've been very fortunate to not only get to know Jay here in the States and through the IBE and through his efforts to bring technology to the United States, but he was gracious enough to host me in Korea. And then we spent a couple weeks not only touring all the universities there, but going to some of his favorite restaurants. And
that was a fun time.
Yeah, it was a wonderful time. But Jay, why don't you talk a little bit about your journey and how you ended up becoming a professor at BU and what that entailed?
Well, Kurt, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to talk in your program. And I have been waiting for this moment for the last 8 years. Just like many other things, it takes time. And I'm so delighted because I really cherish my relationship with you and all the things that you do at IB and Eureka. I'm actually a great beneficiary of that program. And as you said, I have been at Boston University from 1989. So it's now 35 years as a professor at Boston University Business School. And for the last about 10 years, my focus was all about innovation, particularly why biotech innovations are so healthy and vigorous and also most productive in Boston. What makes Boston so successful in creating all that biotech innovation? So I've been doing this research, my kind of research. I think I titled it as the known secrets and hidden secrets of Boston's biotech innovations system. A lot of people talk about many things like investment and entrepreneurs and programs, but I wanted to go a little bit deeper into that. And I think that's how I learned about you. Despite all the notion that Boston has great science and all the wonderful entrepreneurs, some people like Kurt and his friends were creating this program called IBE, saying that we don't have enough of those entrepreneurs. We have many scientists, but not enough entrepreneurs who can really convert wonderful science and promise of science into the practical contribution to the health system and humanity. And I was inspired by that, and I was following your theories, and I came to some of the sessions and learned about what is this entrepreneurship that is converting this science into innovation. About the same time, I was invited by my now friends of Korea, KIST, Korea Institute of Science Technology, who somehow heard about some of my lecture on that known secrets and hidden secrets, and they invited me to come over there. And I think that's where we went together, and I presented IB model to Korea as a scientist community. Scientist is good, but unless science becomes innovation through entrepreneurship, it's going to stay as a science. That's kind of lost to the society. And you came along and told them that scientists can be developed into entrepreneurs. That's how my KIST friends became so impressed by that notion. So they began sending some of their scientists to IBE, and some of them, like my friend Ik-chan, suggests that maybe we should really do it ourselves and understand what it takes to move science to innovation through entrepreneurship. We really want to have somebody like us with a deep hands-on experience on that, and then have some theories about it, so we can transfer Boston's magic to Seoul and KIST area. That will be our lifetime achievement. I think that's what we are doing for now.
Well, I think it's one of the things that I've always so admired is the energy that you bring to this, and the vision that you had to integrate this science, the great science being done in Korea, with the sort of the environment that exists here in Cambridge that has been more conducive to advancing science and technology than other places. That being said, I've always been a big believer that while I think we do some things really well here, that a lot of our productivity is just a matter of being larger than everyone else and having a lot of resources, and that we can do a much better job utilizing those resources. And that gets back to our relationship, because in your capacity as a professor in the business school, you're thinking about how to refine the thinking around the business aspect of this. So talk a little bit more about how you now are the CEO of a company called K2B, from Korea to Boston. Why don't you talk a little bit about that idea and how that really represents a model for what could be possible and scaled, right? Talk a little bit about that.
So you mentioned something very fundamental about Boston, the size and magnitude of science that we have in Boston. But that compared to that, maybe the entire Korea is about half the magnitude of size. I don't know there is any measure of ways of measuring the size of scientific maturity of any community compared to others. But let's say it's science is half the size of Boston. But if you think about the innovation and the real therapeutic products coming out of it, Korea has not 1/10, maybe only 1 or 2% of what Boston is doing. So if science is about half the size, but your innovation is only 1/10 of it, the gap between science and innovation, that process, that's what critically missing in Korea. That's my theory. And I was inspired by this book by fellow business school professor called Gary Pisano in 2006. And if you think about it, 2006, Boston was not what Boston is now, right? There was some glimpse of it. And that's when Gary Pisano did this observation in his book called Science Business. And he said, the science is good, but in order for it to become successful biotech business, we really have to think about many different things. That's what his thesis of this science business is. And key concept of that is there is a business of science, and business of science we are figuring out in biotech models. But also there is a science of business. That's what entrepreneurs have to figure out. How do you really move this science into business? There must be a scientific method behind that too. Well, that's something that I have been studying for the last 5 years, 35 years as a business school professor. So I said, there is a science of business that can be applied to creating biotech cluster and ecosystem. And so I said, I really want to really see how that can be done, right? There is not many written about the science of biotech business in business school community. And then my fellow co-founder Ik-chan suggested, I have the need to really see how science can become business. And Jay, you have this academic urge to figure out what is this biotech business all about? What is the science of the biotech business? Let's invest our passion, vision, and our energy into this. So we somehow talked about it, and then we decided to go all in. Let's say that we are reaching our peak of our career, and there is nothing to lose. If anybody can do it, it must be our generation. And so if we figure out how to get that done, then probably we will learn a few things about that process, and we can pass it to the next generation. So Ik-chan's hope is scientists like him in Korea will become like a scientist in Boston with a successful innovation coming out of their own science. He was regretting that some of his wonderful sciences are not coming into the innovation, staying as a academic paper. So that's how we said, okay, let's do it. So we came up with this name called K2B, from KIST to Boston. So I am the B person, and Ik-chan is K person. We've been at this for now 3 years. And as you might imagine, there is a theoretical approach to creating entrepreneurship, but a lot of it is with real practice, going over these complexity, going over all these uncertainties, how to get this seed funding. How do you convince these investors that your science, which is still far away from becoming a real product, how do you really convince them that we have a chance? That's all something that I'm learning and learning every day and every week. So it was a very rewarding. It was one of the hardest things that I've done as a professor, but I think I'm becoming more like an entrepreneur. So I'm spending bulk of my time here in Cambridge Lab Central with fellow entrepreneurs, some of whom are the academic background from Harvard, MIT. Yeah, you are right. I am the only person among the 50 founders there who is from business school career. And I think there is many things that I can bring from business school experience into the field of a biotech industry.
I agree most definitely. We were talking before we went on camera here that, it's very unique. And I don't know that I can come up with another example of a business school professor leading a biotech company. Most often it's a professor of chemistry, biology, engineering that are the innovators behind the company and the formation of those early stage companies. So that's a unique aspect. Maybe the other thing I was just thinking as you were talking, you have been at BU for quite some time, so you understand the politics of a large university relative to commercializing science and technology. But you also have a pretty intimate understanding of what's going on in Korea. Talk to me a little bit about, is there a difference in the academic environments as you see it at BU, which is unique to universities here as well, meaning what you see at BU is not the same as what you would see at a Harvard or an MIT. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because I was fascinated when I went over there, the quality of science and the hunger to learn more about business. I mean, you marched me over there. I tell this story all the time. So when I went over that first day, and you said, we're going to meet with some people. And a young woman came up to me and said, you'll be presenting. And I said, well, for how long? And she said, like an hour. And I said, to who? And I walked in, there's a room full of people. And I said, well, Jay, who are these people? And they said, they're just all MDs and PhDs at the university. And so there's this big room of people. And I'm like, okay, an hour, what do you want me to talk about? But
well, we always have that kind of moment, right?
But you did that to me every day for the next 2 weeks.
So my moment, when I was teaching in some of these innovation classes at Boston University, I want to teach you something about innovation in biotech. Usually, business school innovation classes teach something about this high tech in Silicon Valley. Not many biotech innovations are now processed to become the classroom materials for business schools. So I went over those, and then I read a case, Harvard Business School case on Bob Langer, the most well-known MIT professor and most well-known MIT professor entrepreneur of our generation. And it was studied by Harvard Business School professors to think about what's the difference between MIT and Harvard. Okay. And so that was a study that probably described the early 21st century about all these things that are happening in MIT. Between even MIT and Harvard, there is this cultural differences among the academic researchers and scientists. I think Harvard professors were more like a scientist, and there was still debate, according to that study, whether science should become a business, whether universities should be involved or the academic professors should be part of that process, making money out of science, right? While MIT was, they didn't care about those things. They just went ahead and did it, right? So that was the cultural difference between two schools that are close, only 5 miles apart. Now, talk about the miles apart. Here to Korea is about 7,000 miles. The cultural differences between Korean academic institutions and American academic institutions it is really large, right? First of all, there is history. Korean academic institutions are now relatively younger community compared to American. Therefore, when you are young scientific community, you tend to focus on the essence of science. When you are mature enough, like Boston's academic institutions, then they begin to think about, do we stop at science or does science become something else? That was the notion that I think it was flourishing in 21st century in many different, mostly Boston and California, I guess, right? So that cultural difference was first thing to overcome. But luckily, always in any academic environment, there are handful, one or two people who really wondered with the same kind of questions. So it was my co-founder, Ik-chan, right? So Ik-chan, wonderful scientist. The reason that I responded to his email was when I searched who the heck is this Ik-chan of KIST. He just won the most prominent science award in Korean government, right? So I said, that's such a good scientist. I was beginning to have this question. And so I thought that finding that kind of glimpse of light, that's what we are all looking for first, right? And then the next is, as a successful entrepreneur, when you see a small light, I think you want to pursue it. What is it? Why is there light? I want to go and see the source of the light, and then I want to do something with that light, right? So that's, I think that was my entrepreneurial spirit or DNA, if you may call it, that really showed me. So many people suggest that it's not easy thing to do innovation from Korean academia. But I said, hey, there is people like Ik-chan. If you make one success, then there will be two people watching, and then we'll have two successes, and then 10 people will be joining in. I think in 10 years, probably we'll have something. So as one of the first cases like that, we thought that there is a mission that we have to, first we have to make our K to be successful. Otherwise, nobody will believe it. So we have to make it successful. But at the same time, we have to make the most learning out of this first attempt, right? So that we can pass on not only those success, but all those the elements of success, what makes innovation success, right? So that's what we've been doing. But as both Ik-chan and I, as a trained academician in the industry for academia for 35 years, combined together is about 70 years, right? We are trained to keep good notes, good lab notes. So one day, hopefully, we will share some of those lessons with them. I guess this is the first time that I'm sharing these lessons, so.
So it's so you are not the only one. We had another alumni that's having some good successes, Ji-hoon Nam.
Yeah,
Dr. Nam he came here for one of our programs. It's probably been I'd say 2018 maybe when he first came here to the States, participated in a program, but then came back as a fellow at Dana-Farber. And I had a great experience with him. So after he was just finishing up his fellowship here in the United States, he invited me to lunch here in Cambridge, right down the street from here at Catalyst. And I went in, it was early. He wanted to meet early for lunch. And I walked in, he was the only one in the restaurant. And he had a big smile on his face. And I sat down and I said, Ji-hoon, what's going on? And he said, when we met, I told you that I wanted to become a CEO of a biotech company. And he said, we just got funded and I am the CEO of a biotech company. And so that was a great experience for me to having someone that was a well-respected academic and, in Korea, then sort of find his path to becoming a CEO of a company. And so,
right. We already made success, right? We already made a success, making the transition from academia to entrepreneur. Some of them are really listening to your story, Kurt.
Well, so my question is, and I think you did a really nice job of sort of framing the differences from the Korean environment, being a maturing, growing environment. The science is quite spectacular. I know I was there and I got to meet with many of the scientists. How do we accelerate the curve of learning in your mind? Because that's something that Tony Manning, our chairman, talks about all the time, that if we can take a student and not have them require 26 or 30 years of time in game to show successes, then we've achieved our objective. What are your thoughts on that and how we do that in Korea?
Well, how do we do it in Korea probably depends on a lot about how do you do it in Boston, right?
Okay.
So if you figure out that magic of how do you accelerate this transformation of science to innovation, then we can copy that recipe or the procedure in Korea. We need some kind of manual, I think. I think in American biotech community, they are now seriously asking these questions about how do we accelerate this science translation into therapeutic product. We just saw a very interesting example in 2020 when this science of messenger RNA was turned into our first COVID vaccine, successful COVID vaccine, in 9 months instead of 9 years, right? So there was this, so I'm carefully following the reports and the reviews of that process. It was a lot about investment, the capital resources, but I also believe that there was a system behind it that enabled it. The system, I think, is about the managing project, understanding scientific variability in a different ways. That's slightly different from that traditional scientific process. This accelerating commercialization, accelerating clinical development, those things. I think that's a wonderful thing. I think that is happening in IBE. If I remember correctly, scientists come in day one with the science, and in 5 days, they already have some idea about project, right? So that's a 5-day acceleration program. If we can repeat that in 1 month and 1 year, and I think that will happen eventually. So IBE, I think, is you really planted the seeds of that magic. Now the question is, if that can happen in Boston, can that happen in Korea? So that's, again, that requires a lot of teaching and a lot of education. I know that because I was doing that about 30 years ago when Korean companies are becoming like global institutions. And they had this big challenge of how do you really convert a local Korean company into a global institute, global organizations? The magic that we found out is the people. The people have to be transformed from Korea's typical businessman into global business professionals, right? So we started with a lot of education program. So that's where I really saw that a glimpse of, it's the people. I know in IBE, Kurt, you talk about not only science and scientific transformation and what are all these FDA, and you talk a lot about how do you change yourself? How do you transform yourself? What's the difference between scientist DNA to entrepreneur DNA? How do you change that expression, right? So that's how I admire your program, and I think I am a true believer of that. So now I'm trying to figure out how do we run IBE program in Korea. We were very close in 2020, right? Running the first IBE program on the KIST campus. Mm-hmm. So we can first try this method with the KIST scientists. Damn, COVID happened, right? Among other things. So after 2 years of a break, now the leadership have different kind of agenda and so on. But definitely, let's try it again. I think I have to take you. I have to fly you to Korea one more time, and then go to those Korean restaurant and drink some Korean soju. With now this time my friend Ik-chan, Gi-hun, some of those KIST alumni who have seen the power of IBE, right? So I think that's that. I would be excited to do that kind of work in the future after K2B success, right? That's the most primary roll down, right?
Well, I think so. There's a couple things that you touched on. The behavioral thing, obviously, I talk about that all the time, and we were downstairs before you joined us today. We had an alumni from 2 years ago who pitched his idea as if he was a student in this session. 10-minute pitch, 10 minutes Q&A. And Scott Flamm and we were the investor panel that sort of critiqued his pitch. We saw in that session a great maturing of that innovator, the founder of the company, as a person. And he himself said that the difficult questions that we were presenting 2 years ago, he didn't react well to them. As a matter of fact, he sort of went at one of the investors and he said, he goes, I didn't say it word for word, but he goes, basically what I intimated was that he didn't know the market, didn't understand the science, and had no reason to be asking questions of that type. But anyways, that being said, what we witnessed was somebody maturing as a person and as a leader of a company. And what he showed today was a great level of humility of what he doesn't know. 2 years ago, he was much more definitive in his thinking and understanding of what he thought was going to happen. And he said, a lot of the things that he had anticipated haven't worked quite the way he had thought they would. What I applaud him for is that he has continued to move this company forward. Had he not done it the way he has done it, which is where he didn't take investment, he bootstrapped it and did it with a client, the company would have failed, because where he had to make adjustments to his thinking and understanding and efforts, he wouldn't have had the time or the money to do that. So I think it's a great example of where, and he said this himself, the behavioral training ended up becoming the fundamental thing that he relied on in helping him make the business decisions he needed to move forward. And so it takes me back to the Korean example, which is that there is a way of thinking that we need to work on. Now, a lot of universities here in the United States talk about this, that we need to change the culture of the academic and how they think about their science. And that we need to get them to think more about the problem they're trying to solve instead of purely doing basic science. Obviously, there's a great need for, and there always will be a demand for basic science. But we also need to think about at what point do we advance that thinking to starting to solve the problem. And as AI comes into play, as quantum computing comes into play, and the marriage of AI with quantum computing, we're going to have a greater advantage in focusing that science on solving problems. And so to the extent that we can take your experience as an example of where we are now and think about how to refine that. As an academic, I like the fact that you're trying to define what it is that's happening that's effective. You touched on the vaccines and the development of the COVID vaccines. There were great lessons learned, the speed with which they brought those forth, but we also learned that there was many mistakes made, right? So understanding where were the advantages gained and where were their disadvantages created because they did move very quickly, right? You have the luxury of being able to examine that as an academic and apply it in a real world setting because you're running a company.
Well, I was academic observing those things, but now I am a frontline entrepreneur actually doing it. So I know the peril of making mistakes. It's a very thin margin out there, particularly environment like a current investment environment. You really have to hit it right more often than not. So you really have to have a very good analytical perspective, analytical skills, and what we call the scientific method, right? At the same time, you said this very critical word that I am feeling the word called humility. Humility, particularly in this life science, because the life science is not yet mature science. And life science is still evolving. We are learning new biology every year. And 10 years ago, there was this thinking that mRNA was not really a thing. But now we all use mRNA as and we are doing business with siRNA. And siRNA had been around for 20 years, but still nobody was able to make success out of it until this company called LILM, led by an amazing entrepreneur, John Maragano, really worked on it for 15 years, failure after failure. So if you go through that, then this notion of humility is an essential element If you do not have humility, you will not accept that something that we planned did not work out. Then many scientists will probably drop it. But if you are an entrepreneur with the humility, then you will accept that failure and then say, oh, my science is incomplete. What's next? You will always think about what's next. That's the person with humility will always have the benefit of the person with who doesn't have humility is this concept of what's next. I know that I am incomplete, but how do I make it a little bit more complete? I know my business science is not complete, but in the life science, nothing can be really complete, right? Because there is so many variabilities and complexities and uncertainties. So we are trying to figure out the best solution among all the complexity. And as an entrepreneur, this humility. So that led me to the management style of CEO of any organization. So I've been teaching about this CEO of organization for 35 years. But now in this environment of life science and all the complexity and uncertainty, the CEO leadership style also has to be different from others. You really have to listen a lot more. You really have to ask questions together with the scientist at the same time, because your scientist does not have all the answers either, right? So my best scientific co-founder, Ik-chan, the best part of him is, Jay, we do not know. So here he has all this wonderful explanation for many things, but certain things, if I push, do we know or not? And he says, we do not know. And then we have to think about, we do not know these things. So how do we move to the next step? That's where humility has to come in. Okay, we do not know. We've been working on this for 20 years. Still, we do not know the answer. What do we do next, right? So humility brings you this courage that, okay, let's go one step further. Let's try one more method and let's see what it is. That's something that I am discovering for the last 2-3 years. And it's actually a fascinating experience. It's a lot different from running a world's largest electronics company like Samsung. It's very different from world's most efficient organization like Toyota. It's very different, and it demands all the imagination and talent of scientists, but at the same time, humility and courage of leaders. So I have a lot of stories to tell already, right? So, but I'm just beginner. We've been doing this for only 2 years. So, as if John Maragano had to work for 20 years to make a success out of LILM, we just spent 2 years, right? So the magic, I think, is, so who will trust my story, who will buy into my humility, who will respect my courage, and then invest their capital to our endeavor. I think that's the mission of any biotech CEO, startup CEO. And I think, again, the key word here is humility. If you tell your investor, we do not have all the answers, but we believe that we have more chances than others. That's all we are. And we are asking you to buy into that idea and then see whether we can make it to the next step. If we keep making these next steps, one day probably we will be able to go over that threshold of that biological complexity, uncertainty. And I think that's how the blockbuster drugs and new generation therapeutics can really happen. So that's what I, after hearing so many no's from venture capital investors these days, this is what I need to find a venture capitalist who believes in this notion of humility and courage, who believes in the notions we don't know all, but we believe we have a chance here. And if we go through this chance in a positive way, there is a really big outcome that we can really imagine. That's what I think as a scientific startup company we are doing in our field.
So as a professor for 35 years teaching business and really understanding business in a very deep, thorough, way, studying it, teaching it. They always say if you want to learn something, teach it, right? What was the big surprise to you as you actually became a CEO and started running the company? What were the things that you would have never anticipated that you encountered? I think this is important because a lot of what we're talking about is the academic then becoming a business-minded person, advancing science from a business perspective. What are your thoughts on that? Because you were a business professor, not just a scientist doing it.
Well, scientist was not scientific CEO, right? So they had to make a similar transition and transformation of themselves. And I think I have to make that transformation so far. But my biggest question that I had to myself is when people are saying, hey, you're a business school professor, running a company is different. That's something that you hear 35 years, right? And you always have this question, is it really different? And so I want to put myself into it. So I try to use all my, I would say, theories and scientific knowledge of running business as much as I can into this. So far, I can report to you, whatever that we are teaching in business school, they are not really wrong. They are really applicable. They are very useful in many elements. What I'm discovering is, however, business school and business school theories don't have all the answers. We don't have answers to what Gary Pisano called as transformative uncertainty. This uncertainty is not just level of uncertainty that we manage to in business school, or called risk management. We have this theory of managing uncertainty, call it risk management. But in biology, Gary Pisano described it as profound uncertainty. And that's something that I am going through is, the uncertainty in life science and biotech, the degree of it is much higher than electronics industry or automobile industry or any software industry, right? And that requires sometimes different ways of approaching that problem. I cannot easily define the problem. So I think I'm spending a lot of time with Ik-chan and also my senior scientists in my company. What is the question that we have to ask rather than what is the answer to the questions we already asked? So what is the question that we have to ask? Because biology does not have a well-defined map. So you have to start with this question, which direction do we go first? In order to really see whether we are making progress or not, right? So that is this notion of profound uncertainty is something that business schools have not even started addressing. And I think that has a lot to do with more humanity, and that side of it probably is a better way of dealing with it. So that's something I'm discovering. But on the other hand, all the other things about this current project that we are doing with my BU MBA students in their consulting project is, how do you value a scientific startup? What's the valuation method? Valuation method in business school is all about expected net cash flow and discounted cash flow analysis. That's a fascinating, but life science biotech is, this valuation is totally different. So now we are developing new theory. That's what I think many entrepreneurs have to do. You cannot just go and read a book and then apply it. You really have to, you have to read a book and then think about what question is it that I am asking, and then use the knowledge or whatever it is at different level and create your own theory. I think that's what entrepreneurs have to do, particularly in the life science sector. So that's the profound uncertainty is a theme that makes me definitely have the humility, right? Because that's the business that we are in, right?
I think, you touched on a bunch of things there, but I think if we take one theme, which is this idea of valuation, your preclinical asset, right? So you have no revenue.
Right.
So the traditional metrics of putting value on these assets, it's hard, right? But there's large markets, right? You've got unmet need where you have disease there are no cures for. So it starts to create a value proposition that exists if, in fact, the science is successful. Then what are the risks around proving that science to be successful? Right. Again, there are no solid metrics that you can use and just point to a table and say, here are the primers that I'm faced with, and here's how it equates to value.
Right.
So Greg was talking about this. Greg Fairbrothers was talking about this yesterday in his session. You said, you guess. You guess, and then you come up with a justification, right? And that's a lot different than what you're teaching, right? You don't have a session in business school on guessing, right?
We have all the structure of the problem laid out, and you're using very elegant methodology to really define something out of it, right? But I really truly agree with Greg's point of this guessing. But guessing based on all your knowledge, guessing based on all your experience. I think that's the innovation, particularly at the level of life science. It's a guessing of a mighty scientist. So you use all your previous knowledge and then make the guess, right? So we are doing this using siRNA to really down-regulate a very, very promising target used by cancers, right? So that's So because we are using new modality called siRNA, which has never been done in cancer industries, cancer scientists. So we are thinking about how will this work? Has cancer ever encountered this kind of treatment? What does cancer react with, right? So we all know that cancer reacts to any treatment in its own way. And then if you have a record, then the scientists will develop the countermeasure to cancer's reaction. But in siRNA, we do not have that yet. So we are guessing, actually. But we are guessing it with all our literature and all our knowledge. So I think it was Steve Jobs who taught us 40 years ago. It's about connecting the dots. There are some theories here, some theories there, some knowledge here, some knowledge there. Cool and clever entrepreneurs, you really have to learn how to connect those dots to see possibility somewhere. And then now you go after that with that possibility, see whether we can prove, right? So I think we are learning to do a lot of this connecting the dots in my company currently, in siRNA, tumor, all these targets. And this gives me this big challenge. We are trying all those, but when we are pitching, you talked about this pitching. Now I have to guess how much of these things that I'm going to pitch, do these investors already have seen or know, or is first time they see? It is a big guessing game. So that's the biggest challenge. And they give you only 10 minutes to pitch. That's totally unfair game, right? Ikchan worked on this for 15 years and I worked on 2 years and they give you 10 minutes to pitch. That's ridiculous, but hey, that's a different story, right? So,
well, you mentioned something that's interesting. So you talk about there's this vision, right? There's this idea and there's a possibility, right? And then you jump to, and we have to prove it. But it's that in between is the world that you live in right now, right, which is how do I convince someone that my vision has enough merit to justify an investment in proving that vision, right? And that's the world you live in. And what I contend is that comes down to me trusting J. Kim.
Oh.
And so what I mean by that is that, and I told all the students in this session of the IBE yesterday, I asked them the question. I said, what is the one thing I know about your technology and your pitch that's an absolute certainty as you're making your pitch, and that it will be true for every one of you on Sunday? And they all sat there and they looked at me and I said, come on, what's the one thing that I know is true? and they didn't know. And
that's a hard question to answer.
Okay,
right. That's a hard question, but I think you're talking about, so what word, what language will you use so that your listeners will trust you, right? Although they do not know your science.
You're getting close to it.
Yeah.
But here's the one thing I know.
Oh, okay.
Is that you're wrong.
Yeah.
That whatever you tell me is wrong. Okay. What I don't know is how wrong you are. Right. And I don't know how you are going to solve the problems that you encounter relative to being right. Right? So when I'm looking at as an investor, right, I'm saying, do I trust that Jay Kim will solve the problems that need to be solved to realize his vision? And that's what I'm evaluating, because I know you're wrong. And the gentleman that was downstairs today, if you take what he presented 2 years ago, he was absolutely wrong, right? And the investors all knew it. And at that point, we thought he was too immature to figure out what would be right. Now, he's moved and advanced his science exponentially, right? He's made great progress, and he's developed a tremendous amount of humility in doing that. He admits, I was arrogant. I said things I shouldn't have said. I thought things that weren't true. I know that, and anybody with maturity that's been around long enough knows that. So the question is now, how do we help people better understand the connection with other people to garner that trust that's necessary to navigate the chasm that we're both discussing? And I had it happen last night. We were doing some rehearsed pitches, and people were laying out their deals, and there was a gentleman, a young scientist. I really like him, but he's being very cavalier and sort of flip in his answers. And there were probably about 8 people sitting around the table last night. And I finally called him out, and I said, you do that on Sunday, and you're going down in flames. And he just sat back.
You crushed him.
No, and I said, look, I said, if one of my own children acted like you're acting right now, I would scold them and say, don't do that.
Yeah.
And so this morning, he just pulled me aside right before we came up here, and he said, I want to apologize. He said, I was being flip. And he said, and you were being serious about what I want to pitch on Sunday. And he said, I was wrong. And he goes, I shouldn't have done that. And I said, this is the place you do it. You don't want to do it in front of a real investor.
Yeah. Well, Kurt, you know that all these scientists that are coming to your IB program, they are all PhDs, right? When you're a PhD, you are supposed to say, I know something, rather than I don't know those things, right? So I think that's a culture thing. That has a lot to do with this behavioral aspect of entrepreneurs. When I met you about 8 years ago, I really thought this IB concept is very cool. And then I saw you doing your thing in one of the sessions about behavioral aspect of this entrepreneurship. What is it talking about? What has anything to do, behavior have anything to do with this scientific business, right? So I wonder that. And then every time you talk about that, I didn't ask that question to myself, right? So your question and those things about behavioral aspect of it, now you are saying that this notion of trust as the biggest connector of investor to entrepreneur notion. Now I'm 100% in. It's a lot about behavioral things. I can tell you the data. I have a PhD. I was professor for 35 years. So I am also supposed to say, I know, rather than I don't know, right? But as you said, when we say, we don't know, we don't have the answer, I think you are correct that there is a lot better response from my investors. But I guess I made a same mistake 2 weeks ago, insisting that I know to this investor. I think that's why I got this email saying we are passing, right?
Yeah.
Wow. I should have talked to you 2 weeks ago. But next investor, I'm going to say, I don't know. We don't know. But we are working this way to figure out how much we don't know, how much we want to know. And probably next time we will have answer for that. And I hope your investment will enable us to find that answer. That's probably the right approach, right?
There's a concept we talk about which is that the investor is trying to figure out a reason to say no to you, right? That's number one, because they're going to look at maybe 1,000 deals to pick 3, right? They'll look at 1,000 things. So they're trying to pass on stuff quickly to get to what they believe to be the high value opportunity, right? There's another dynamic that's extremely important. And I did it myself this morning when I was listening to this young man present. It's called pattern matching. That there was an element of what he was presenting that mirrored a project, a company that I started that failed. And I said, the same dynamics that existed that led to my failure, I'm hearing in his presentation. And it immediately put me on the negative perspective. Now, when we finished his pitch and when we finished the Q&A, we'd been at this maybe about 50 minutes. I went around to everyone in the room and I said, you get to say yes or no. You're either going to invite this person back for another meeting or you're going to pass on this deal. And it was 50-50. 50% of the room said yes and 50% said no. I was in the no category. Scott Flam, who was the other investor, so to speak, critiquing this deal, said yes.
Oh, I like Scott.
So we split on it. And then I proceeded to outline my concerns. But the thing I didn't express in that meeting and in that discussion today was that part of my decision was that pattern matching, that I had seen something that was a negative outcome for me, and I equated that project with it. Are they exactly the same? No, they're not. Has this individual done much more to think about the why and the benefit and the value proposition than I had? Yes. Right? But I saw enough similar things, the pattern match, that it took me to a negative place.
Yeah.
And that's the world you're living in too.
Yeah.
You only have to show one little thing that allows them to say no.
Right.
And you have to show them hundreds to convince them that it's a yes. It's such a difficult world.
They don't say yes. We like to talk more. That's always the yes that I'm looking for, right? But I think that that's why you are in this business of IBE. This great institution, IBE, is so that this young generation who are showing same pattern of your failure 30 years ago came to your place so that they can hear from you, young man, I saw that 30 years ago, right? And then the difference between your failure and this young man's experiences, this young man's failure in a very safe place, learn that, which you did not, right? So next time he goes out to talk to somebody, he will go differently, I think. I think that's the power of education and our power of IB that you are creating. Suddenly, I like to be your student again.
Well, I think we're sort of colleagues on this journey together is the way I look at it, that we learn from each other. I also think that you mentioned that this younger generation, I think it's important for us as people that have had a lot of time in the game, right? You know, you and I are both, 30, almost 40 years, right, of doing this. When you look at that, I think we have to rethink our own journey and how we're supporting these people. And that's part of why the IB exists, right? It's not me. I know I get a lot of credit for it. It's, 1,000 people, alumni. The gentleman was down there today. He's an alumni coming back to teach, right? The student has become the teacher, right? And, all of us have to rethink. I know Chuck was here a couple of days ago, Chuck Yon, who's one of the founders of the IB, and we were talking about it, but he's still giving back. He doesn't need to be working now, and he doesn't need to be spending time doing this, but he still wants to make sure that he imparts the knowledge he gained and the experience he gained on others and speed up their journey. So I really admire what you're doing, because what you're doing is difficult, right? It's a hell of a lot easier to just stay in the classroom.
Hey, classroom is not that easy either. But
no, but it's easier than what you're doing, right? You don't have to ask the students for the money. That's already been taken care of, right?
So you mentioned something about next generation. If you think about it, the science that we worked on in our generation is transferred to the younger generation in the form of literature and knowledge. So when this younger generation is doing their science, they are doing the science on top of our shoulder. So they are going to the next level. But so that's why it is so important to have this literature and science literature and those things. But I am beginning to feel there is much too little literature about entrepreneurship. We go through all this experience, your success, your failure, your generation. We don't have a chance to pass it over to the next generation as much as the science itself. So science is progressing at the speed of that scientific speed. But entrepreneurship, we do not have, even though I came from business school, that's where we are supposed to do these things. But this experience and all these elements of entrepreneurs. So what we really need to do is program like you so that we give back our experience. And hopefully, while you are giving back, I want to make it into format of something of, we can call that written book, or this kind of podcast will be the wonderful thing for the future generation. So that our experience at the first hand can be digested and analyzed and then handed over to the younger generation as much as that RNA science does. So I think that's something that I really want to do after I make success out of my current responsibility of K2B.
I would add to your thinking in that I would say, as it relates to your comments on the science, I think that while there's a lot of literature and a lot of publications on the science, I think that they do not represent our knowledge base because the data, there's a lot of data that really is never, it isn't put into the collective, right? It's kept in silos. So the body of data that may exist on a particular area of science is not shared in a way that there's a incremental gain in learning and understanding. And so that's where AI and quantum computing can come into play.
Well, AI and quantum planning can be a good play there, but I thought from my experience in innovation science is that's where the innovation and business is. If you're creating life science, then life science companies, you cannot based on one or two elements of innovation. You have to collect many different elements of innovation. So innovation does not stay in their own island. So our job of science entrepreneurship is to bring them together, as you said, into the more like knowledge, right? So that's one way of doing it. I am looking forward to seeing how AI will change the science eventually. But I think what I'm doing now is, in our business, we are combining siRNA with the tumor and with the delivery mechanism and this conjugation technology. It's all in many different islands, and we are trying to put together into one knowledge that we can utilize, and then probably that will become another base of a few further innovations down the future. So as much as we look forward to AI and other these technologies, but I think entrepreneurs creating these companies, life science companies, trying to combine many different data and science into some useful knowledge. I think that's something that I am beginning to understand. Oh, science, Ik-chan regretted, science is staying as a science in Korea. Therefore, we are not adding a whole lot of value to the community. And something is different in Boston. Science is not staying in science. They are coming out and becoming products and therapeutics and to the contribution to the community. I think that's what why we need more of life science entrepreneurs who create these biotech companies, who do all those things. So science comes out of library or science to become a contribution to the humanity. So that's another wonderful vision that I have with Ik-chan.
Well, there was a publication recently by the University of Pennsylvania that stated that about 96% of the science that is being done in academic institutions cannot be reproduced for commercial purposes. Right. Now, let's talk a little bit about what that means. there is the fact that maybe the science just doesn't work, right? More often than not, it's that it doesn't scale, right? Because you can do an experiment in a small lab and make it successful, and it's not bad science necessarily, but when you try to do it at scale, then certain dynamics affect the outcomes.
Right.
So we know this to be the case, right? So it isn't that the scientists necessarily made a mistake or did something wrong. It's just that they didn't think about that other aspect, which is the scale. And so that thinking is something we can start to incorporate into the thinking of the academic, which would change those parameters. The 96 now naturally decreases, right? So that's one thing that we could improve upon. And I think data and sharing information in a better, more efficient way would help that. You touched on something earlier, which is the other aspect, which is the body of literature that exists relative to entrepreneurship. And I think one of the challenges we have there with condensing it into a definitive textbook on the topic is the dynamic nature of being an entrepreneur. Right? Is that I have a good friend, Tony McKinney, and he's been a serial entrepreneur in numerous companies, and he's had a number of successes. And we were sitting in a room one day watching another CEO present, and the CEO was very cavalier about, I didn't have to raise money, and we bootstrapped it, and we had a client, and we developed our science off the client's back, and then we licensed the first application out and made a ton of money, and that gave us money to invest in the next 2 applications, and we licensed those and made more money. And he's talking about how easy this is, right? And Tony leans into me and says, if you've been a CEO in one company, you've been a CEO in one. And whatever you thought you were so good at in that first one, you're a fool if you believe it's going to be the same thing the second time through.
That's a remarkable point. So these are entrepreneurs who give their hearts and whole souls to making one success. After making one success, they don't have any. So writing literature on your success story is another enterprise that you don't have energy to do that, right? So I know that because if you remember Steve Jobs, his innovation and theory, there is only one good book by Walter Isaacson about what kind of innovation that he really worked on and how he was successful. After that Steve Jobs' success of life, there was only one book that I was able to really see, and it was written by historian Walter Isaacson, right? So that's how much innovators cannot really. And another innovator I'm now really following very carefully is this founding CEO of ILM. Because they are SIRNA company, I'm really watching them. After making that whole success out of LILM, working on it for 25 years, all John Maragono was able to talk about was 8-page paper. He couldn't write one book. So there is an amazing book, amazing paper, and I was reading his paper published in Nature and said, wow, this one paragraph could be 2 chapters, right? But these entrepreneurs don't have time and energy to write all this. So again, another thing that is our life and entrepreneur. This is we give our whole heart and soul into it, and I hope somebody else is watching me and decode it and then make a book out of it so that we can pass over my experience to my next generation, right? So that's.
So there was this morning one of the projects that we were talking about is a robot, a lab robot that runs the experiments in the lab. And I was talking to the founder of the company, and he was explaining to me, if I want to pick up this cup of coffee with my hand, I think to myself, I want a cup of coffee. I want to have a sip of coffee. And he said, and so I just reach out and I grab it and I take the sip. And he said, if you're going to reduce that to instructions that a robot needs to follow, he said, you have to detail out every aspect of that, right? Every movement, and the twisting of the hand and the gently putting the finger into the cup and the gripping it and putting attention.
All the torque and pressure and all those things, right? Quantify everything into the optimal level. And
right. And that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
reducing it down
Right.
to that level of detail
Right.
that somebody can interpret and replicate,
Right.
as opposed to the things that you do without even realizing that you did them.
Right.
And I think that it really, just listening to you and listening to what Chase was talking about this morning and describing the movement of the robot, I think really that is our challenge, right? Is to take those things that become intuitive. And that's the apprenticeship, right? That's 10 years,
right?
Whatever, 7 to 10 years or 10,000 hours, however you want to define it, right? Which is that there is no substitute for the experience, right? You could teach it for 35 years,
right?
But until you're the CEO,
right,
and you're living it,
right,
there's a whole different parameters that you'd never considered
right.
and had to navigate.
Yep.
So
I have to admit that it's a different plateau, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I so admire that you're on this journey. I so admire it because you don't need to do it. And you're doing it not just for K to B and making that successful, but you're doing it as a model that could be replicated for an entire community of scientists.
Well, Kurt, thank you, but I have to do it. And I don't do it for any other reason than to make a K to be successful. And that's what my mentality is now. Hopefully, we will succeed. And then we will be able to tell the world that we did it, and now we know something. Still, Kurt, your next video with me you will remind me again, Jay. However, you don't know all, right? so that's
I don't think I have to remind you that. I think you already know that, which is that's wisdom, right? Well, that's where we come.
That's why I need friends like you, so that you can remind Jay, right?
Well, it's not everybody knows this, but your wife's here with us today, and so that's your other motivation,
right?
Which is you better figure this out,
right? Well, we are lucky that way, right? Yeah, we are lucky that way.
We're both very fortunate that way.
Fortunate.
So, I want to thank you for spending the time with me today. I know you came in special for this morning, and it's always just such a pleasure to spend time with you and talk to you. I am very much looking forward to our next trip to Korea to advance what they're doing and take your learnings and make it part of the foundation for what we could possibly do there in advancing the science and bring science to the States.
Yeah, that'll be exciting and very rewarding, and I'll look forward to it very much, Kurt. You have been my inspiration already for the last decade, and then we'll do it again for the next decade.
Well, thank you. I value the friendship, and I appreciate it so much.
Thank you very much.
We will talk soon.
Thoroughly. So soon, very soon, right? Okay, let's do that.
Take care, my friend.
Okay, thank you.